world watched it. You've not given an interview since. You were there, I think, 57 minutes. Tell us from your perspective what that was like.
Well, it was a horrible thing because I did nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing wrong. You look at even the pundits and the legal analysis, Greg Jarrett, all of these really talented people, they're saying he didn't do anything wrong. So that's number one. Number two, they were incredible. When I went to the courthouse, which is also a prison in a sense, they signed me in. And I'll tell you, people were crying. People that work there, professionally work there, that have no problems putting in murderers, and they see everybody. It's tough, tough place. And they were crying. They were actually crying. They said, I'm sorry. They'd say, 2024, sir, 2024. And tears are pouring down their eyes. I've never seen anything like those people are phenomenal. Those are your police.
Yep.
Those are the people that work at the courthouse. They're unbelievable people. Many of them were in tears or close to it. Many apologists were sorry, sir. We're sorry. They had to have me do certain things. They said, sir, I can't believe I have to ask you. I can't even believe that I have to ask you to do it. You could see. So in one sense, it was beautiful because they get it. In another sense, you know, it's nasty. I went to the Wharton School of Finance. They didn't teach me about that. That wasn't like
they didn't know about the arraignment part?
That wasn't. We didn't have a class on arraignment. And, you know, it was a sad day in many ways, and in many ways it was a beautiful day because the people understand. I didn't know this was happening, but the poll numbers have gone through the roof. The people get it, and the other ones are hoaxes also. You know, the box hoax. Look at Biden, he's got 1,850 boxes, and, you know, that's a hoax. And then the one in Atlanta where I had a perfect phone call. This is all weaponization. They're weaponizing our justice system, Tucker. And they think if they go and give you a subpoena, you know, I guess I'm very well known and people understand it and they get it, and maybe I have a bigger platform so I can explain it. But if you're somebody, a Republican, let's say, running for office, and you get a subpoena, you might as well resign because you're not going to be able to survive it. And the voters aren't going to handle it. The voters aren't going to take it. What they're doing is weaponizing the system, and there's never been anything like it. And it's all disinformation. You see, the other day, Afghanistan, one of the worst things I've ever seen, I think the most embarrassing moment that this country's ever had, frankly, the way we got out. Not the getting out. We had to get out. It was ridiculous to be there. And I had that so good, so tight, so tough. I spoke to the leader, Abdul. I said, Abdul, if you do anything, you're going to get hit really hard. Literally, he said, but sir, why? Why? He goes, why, oh, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you'll have to figure that one out, Abdul. But we didn't have one death in 18 months. He knew. Not one death. And then to see the way we got out, like we were surrendering, like taking the military out first, leaving $85 billion worth of equipment behind, giving up Bagram. I was going to keep Bagram. I was getting out, but not for Afghanistan. It's 1 hour away from where China makes its nuclear weapons. It's one of the biggest Air Force bases in the world, I think the biggest, with runways that go 10,000 feet. I was keeping that because of China, not because of Afghanistan.
Right.
And they left everything. They left in the dark of night. They left the lights on. They left the dogs, by the way. You know, the people say about the dogs. They left the dogs. Everyone, you know, the dog lovers, and you got a lot of them. I love dogs. You love dogs. But they left the dogs. People said, what? One of the first questions I got, what did they do with the dogs? Mostly German Shepherds. They left them. What they did, the way they got out, was so horrible. Okay, everybody knows that was their plan. That had nothing to do with me. I was getting out, too. We would have gotten out with strength and dignity. And what happened? They got out. And the other day I hear, yeah, it was Trump's fault. Oh, that's right. It was Trump. I was gone for a long. I would have been out faster than them. We would have had all the equipment. We would have had the American citizens. We left hostages. We left Americans behind. Many, I think many more than you think. And we had 13 soldiers killed. And nobody ever mentions the fact that we had many maimed so badly. No arms, no legs. Their face was obliterated. This is the way this guy got out. We would have gotten out with dignity and strength. We were going to. But I was taking 100% of, I said, I want every nail. I want every screw. I want the tents. They said, sir, the tents are very hard to take out. I said, I want the tents. I want the tanks, I want the planes, I want everything. And a couple of them fought me on it, like Millie. He said, sir, I think it's cheaper to leave the equipment behind. I said, let me ask you, we have a plane that cost $100 million. It's sitting there. All it needs is a tank of gas, right? Give me a little jet fuel. We'll fly it to Pakistan or any place else, or we'll fly it directly home. You say it's cheaper to leave a $100 million plane? Sir, I think overall it's cheaper. These are idiots we're dealing with. They left $85 billion worth of equipment. They left our American citizens behind. And they moved the military out first. No, you move the military out last. I did a little skit with a 5-year-old kid. I said, let me ask you, here's the situation. I explained the situation. I said, would you take the military out first, or would you take it out last? I take it out last, 5-year-old. But they took the military out first, and they were afraid of our military. When I was there, they were afraid. We didn't have one soldier killed in 18 months, Declan. Not one soldier was killed in 18 months. And then we got out like we surrendered. I think it was the single most embarrassing day in the history of our country. It was totally their fault. They didn't go by anything because, you know, we had a system of getting out. But if the Taliban, in particular, the Taliban, because that's where the action was, right? When I called Abdul, the press went crazy. The fake news went crazy. Why did he call an enemy? I said, well, it's Jesse James. I used to ask him, why did he rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. Why did I call the head of the Taliban? Because that's where the killing was. And he's there now, Abdul. I'm sure he likes me. He called me Your Excellency. I don't know if he calls Biden Your Excellency. Probably. I mean, you know, they're one of the largest arms dealers now in the world. They're selling the $85 billion worth of it because they only need 5% of it.
Of course.
They're selling the equipment. They're one of the largest, I think, second arms dealers. Brand new helicopters, brand new airplanes, brand new tanks. Unbelievable what we left behind. We ran, and there was no reason to. I had them. I could have stayed there for 5 years if I wanted to. I wanted out. 21 years was enough. I wanted out. We shouldn't have been there in the first place. But when I see what happens, when I see the level of stupidity, and because of that, it's all a big web. Because of that, I think Putin, who would have never gone into Ukraine when I was there, would have never, I talked to him about it often, would have never, ever done that. When he saw that I wasn't there, and he saw these fools, these stupid people, and think of that, the way they left Afghanistan, and nobody was fired. I fired a lot of people because if they didn't do a good job, I'd fire them.
May I ask, you talked to Putin about Ukraine. What did you say to him?
I could see that he loved it. And I said...
he loved Ukraine.
He considers it to be a part of Russia.
Yeah.
I said, not when I'm president. We had a very good relationship. He was... I mean, look, I was the worst thing that ever happened to him. I closed up his pipeline. You never heard the words Nord Stream 2 until I came along. Nord Stream 2 was their pipeline. And I had a great relationship with him, but it was very tough because they had a fake Russia investigation. And I told him, and he told me, he said, it's very hard for us to deal, don't you think? I said, very hard, because we have a fake investigation that turned out to be a fake. For 2 years it went on. And we could have done very well with Russia. They have great minerals. They have great things that we want, we could have, and they need the money and they need other things. But that interfered. That was a terrible thing. That was actually a treasonous thing to do. Those people should have been arrested. They made it up. They made up a problem with Russia that didn't exist. Now they've all admitted it didn't exist. It was just on to the next one. I often say, they said to me the other day, one of your fellow journalists said, who's the biggest problem, sir? Is it China? Could it be Russia? Could it be North Korea? No, I said, the biggest problem is from within. It's these sick, radical people from within, because we can handle, if we're smart, we can handle Russia, China. I did. I took in billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars from China. No other president took in anything, and they respected me. He's the same thing, you know. I told him, you can't go into Taiwan. You can't do it. I won't tell you exactly what I said, but it was something that probably a lot of people wouldn't like if they heard it, but it was very tough. Don't go into Taiwan. If you do, we're going to have problems. Other than that, we're going to be great relationship. We're going to have a great relationship. And he said to me when I said we're going to do something, if he goes in, no, you wouldn't do it. I'll do that. I swear I'll do that. And he didn't believe me, but he believed me 10%. The same thing with Putin. I said I was going to do something really nasty if he goes into Ukraine. He said, no, you're not going to do that. I said, I will. And he didn't believe me either, but he believed me 10%. And the 10%, you never heard talk about going into Ukraine. You never heard talk about going into Taiwan until I was no longer there. Now, what a mess the world is in. What a mess.
We traveled to Mar-a-Lago today to interview the former president on his recent arrest by a Democratic prosecutor. But once we sat down, we wound up talking mostly about foreign policy. For a man who is caricatured as an extremist, we think you'll find what he has to say moderate, sensible, and wise. When we come back, Donald Trump's greatest fear for America, something we almost never talk about. We'll be right back. Covering the weather beat here in windy Palm Beach. Actually, we're here to interview the former president and now the Republican frontrunner, Donald Trump. While the rest of us have spent the last 2.5 years arguing about systemic racism and trans rights and other ephemera, other imaginary things, America's position globally has eroded so fast it defies belief. But Donald Trump has noticed things have really changed since he left office, and that's the topic of this next part of the conversation. Here it is. You said at the time when you were president that going to war with Russia, either hot war or cold war, would drive Russia into an alliance with China.
I did.
That would displace us as the most powerful nation.
I did. But we have a bigger problem. The bigger problem is the weaponry. The weaponry today is so powerful. This isn't like Second World War where we have army tanks running around shooting each other. This is weapons the likes of which the world has never seen before. And they have them and we have them. And China has them less, but within 5 years, China will have equal to us. China, I'm talking about nuclear. China has the beginnings of a very big, very powerful nuclear. They're short 5 years. They had started much later. Russia and us are comparable. Massive power, massive. And that's one of the things.
More than people understand?
More than people understand, yeah. Yeah, more.
Were you
surprised? They don't understand the power. If you look at Hiroshima, as some people call it, if you look at Nagasaki, you look at those two events took place many, many years ago, and multiply that power times 500. That's what you're talking about. Where it actually melted the granite. You know, granite is unmeltable by blowtorches.
Yes.
But the granite, if you look at granite areas, it's like water that got, hardened, like an ice skating rink. It melted the granite. If you look at that and multiply it times 500, that's what you're talking about. When I listen to people talk about global warming, that the ocean will rise in the next 300 years by 1/8 of an inch, and they talk about this is our problem. Our big problem is nuclear warming. I mean, nobody even talks about it. The environmentalists talk about all this nonsense in many cases. Look, I'm an environmentalist also, I guess, in my own way, because I've done a good job with the environment. But nobody talks about nuclear. The problem we have, the biggest problem we have in the whole world, it's not global warming, it's nuclear warming. And all it takes is one madman, and you're going to have a problem the likes of which the world has never seen. And it's only a matter of seconds. You don't have to wait 200 to 300 years for it to happen.
So what you're saying is demonstrably true. Why is this not something our leaders talk about or the press talks about?
Because I don't think they're smart. I don't think they get it. Putin got it. I would talk to him about it all the time. I never mentioned the word nuclear. You never heard me mention the word. You know, my uncle was a professor, a great professor at MIT for a long time. I think he has the longest, Dr. John Trump. And he would talk about a lot of different things, and it was very interesting to me. For years, I talked to him. Passed away. He's a great, great gentleman. I think it's the longest tenured professor in the history of MIT. But if he wasn't, he was very close, because he was there for almost 40 years. And we talk about things, and he said, you know, someday they'll have a suitcase, and in that suitcase, it'll be nuclear, and you'll blow up New York City out of a suitcase. And I said, no, Uncle John, that can't possibly. He's right. The power is so incredible. You can fire up a submarine and run it for years on essentially a tablet. Run it for years. So when we talk about war, and when I watch all of the people talking about Ukraine and how's Ukraine doing, blah, 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 Russia's sitting back. First of all, Ukraine's being obliterated.
Yes.
Okay, let's not even talk nuclear. But let's say it wasn't. Let's say they were doing better than anticipated. If he decided to use his second form of destruction, which is nuclear, that's the end of that. Do you understand? And I know where you are in Ukraine, so I mean, you understand it better than most. Most people don't. Most people don't even talk about it. They don't talk about the fact that he has equal to the United States in nuclear capability and destruction. And so I watch all of this happening, and it's so sad.
But can I just ask, so the Biden people know the power of nuclear weapons. They now control our arsenal. They don't seem worried about this.
That's because they don't understand life. They don't understand whatever it is that you have to understand. You know, it's very interesting. At the very beginning, Biden was very afraid of nuclear because I watched him and he was, oh, they have nuclear weapons. Oh, which was exactly the wrong signal to send. You don't do that. But if you go back and check your files, you'll see Biden early on saying, oh, well, we can't do this. They have nuclear weapons. Well, you don't want to, you don't want to act that way.
Yeah.
But he was very afraid of nuclear. I said, you got to be a little bit cooler than that. But what happened is now that nobody talks about it. But every day Putin mentions it, and every day other people mention it. And now all of a sudden, if you look, other countries are talking about getting it. This was something you don't mention. I call it the N word. You have two N words. You don't mention either one of them. The nuclear word you don't mention because the power is so destructive. I met with professors at MIT, and I was preparing for a debate. I wouldn't say it was a long preparation, but I did want to talk about nuclear because I consider it to be the single greatest threat the world has, far greater than global warming, like not even a contest. And I had these people come down that were very smart, very expert, and I said, so when we start talking about nuclear in a debate, how would you handle it? And they looked at me, one in particular, and said, sir, you can't talk about it. You cannot talk about it. I said, what does that mean? He said, it is so massive, it is so destructive that you cannot talk about it. I understood exactly what he meant. And we stayed away from it for the most part. But now Putin's mentioning it all the time. We don't mention, but Putin's always mentioning it. You've heard him say it. We are a nuclear power. He said not so long ago, I said, that's the first time I've heard a major country. You do hear it talked about, and I did a good job. I did a great job with North Korea, Kim Jong-un. You went with me on a trip. You insulted him, which didn't make my life too easy, but that's okay. But you were there, one of the few. And it was an amazing, it had to be one of the most incredible experiences for you.
For sure.
But it was amazing. We had thousands of reporters. They weren't treated particularly nicely either, by the way, but I got along great with him. And because of that, it started rough, remember, with, Rocket Man, Little Rocket Man? And he said, I have a button on my desk, a red button. I said, I have a red button on my desk too. Mine's bigger and mine works, yours doesn't. And this went on for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden, the log jam was broken, and he wanted to meet, and we did meet, and we get along great. To this day, we get along great. He won't talk to Biden. He won't even talk to these people. He won't even talk to them. He has no respect for him. He's a man. If he respects you, he'll respect you. He wouldn't talk to Obama. Obama tried to get meetings with him. He wouldn't meet with him. He met with me. I met with him twice. I would have had a deal worked out with him. He's got tremendous nuclear capability. It's the single biggest problem. Maybe this show's more important than even I thought it might be, because somebody's got to understand what has to happen, and they have to de-escalate.
So how would you do that now?
Well, now, so you have a problem. you got this crazy world is blowing up, and the United States has absolutely no say. And Macron, who's a friend of mine, is over with China, kissing his ass, okay, in China. I said, France is now going to China. You take a look at Saudi Arabia. Look at what happened. They're great people. They wanted to help us. He goes over and gets a fist pump. You know what a fist pump means? Don't shake my hand because your hand's dirty. That's what a fist pump is. They got it. They were so insulted. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Oh, I don't want to shake your hand. Let's go fist pump.
For the past 7 years, the neocon media establishment's been telling you that Donald Trump is a dangerous lunatic. In 2 years in office, Joe Biden has brought the world to the brink of nuclear holocaust. Who's the dangerous lunatic? And they're lecturing you about global warming. Joe Biden says he's running again for president in 2024. We asked Donald Trump his assessment of whether that's going to happen and whether anything could get him out of the race, including a legal conviction. That's next. Democrats arrested the Republican frontrunner last week in an effort to keep him from running for president. Will it work? We asked Donald Trump directly. And does he think Joe Biden will actually run? Here's that conversation. Do you think Biden will stay in the race?
Look, I watch him just like you do, and I think it's almost inappropriate for me to say it, but I deal with other people. I don't see how it's possible, and it's not an age thing. You know, like I say, I have friends that are 88, 89, 92. Bernie Marcus, Home Depot, is 95. He's smart as hell. He's sharp as he was. I mean, he's, you know, mentally. Bernie Marcus, Home Depot, founder of Home Depot, one of the founders. I mean, I had a meeting with him a few months ago. He was 100%. I know people that built their fortunes from 80 to 90. They were always struggling, and they made a fortune from 80 to 90. A couple of people in particular. It's amazing. He's not too old. You know, his age. I think they do the age thing because I'm 4 or 5 years behind. They say this is a way of getting Trump. Let's go him up. But there's something wrong. I saw his answer today on television about whether or not he was going to run, to a very nice guy named Al Roker. I mean, you can't get a softer question than that. That was a long answer, talking about the eggs and the this and that. Look, I don't think he can. But say what you want. They didn't expect him to get it. Yeah. You know, people could say he won an election. You know, it always goes, I got the most votes of any person, any sitting president in history. I was told if I got 15 million less, I couldn't lose. They're surrounded by vicious, smart people, radical left people, but they're very smart and they're very vicious. It's not him. It's not him. He's now in Ireland. He's not going to have a news conference. When the world is exploding, I own property in Ireland. I'm not going to Ireland. The world is exploding around us. You could end up in a third world war, and this guy's going to be in Ireland and not having a news conference. He hasn't had a news conference, I guess, in months. I saw today where he hasn't. It's been.
Well, he can't. So if he doesn't run, if he's taken out by his own party, or who knows what happens, but it doesn't seem like he's capable of running again, who does run?
Well, obviously the one that they would talk about would be the vice president, Kamala. That would be the one that they talk about. But I don't think she's performed well on the big stage. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. But there are a certain group of people that will go crazy if it's not her. They're going to be very angry if it's not her. That's a problem. You have a very ambitious guy in California, but he's done a terrible job with the state. I used to get along great with him, you know, when I was president. I got along really good, Gavin.
Well, you got along with Gavin Newsom?
I did. I really did. He was always very nice to me. He said the greatest things. He would say things like he's doing a great job. Oh, he was very nice.
About you?
About me. That's why I could never hit him, because he was so nice to me. He's just laying in wait, right? But I could, you know, he was very nice to me. And relatively speaking, some of them weren't. We did a good job for the governors. But They talk about him. They talk about some others. I just don't see Biden doing it from a physical or a mental standpoint.
Yes.
I don't see it. But it's been a crazy period of time in the world of politics. But he's surrounded by people. You know, they expected Bernie to win. Now, Bernie's older than Biden, you know, whether you like him or not. He's sharp. I watched him being interviewed the other day. He's 100% sharp. He hasn't lost much, if anything, Bernie Sanders. But, you know, he's older. So it's not an age thing. I just don't see him.
So they're trying to prevent you from making it to the general election by tying you up in lawsuits, charging you with crimes. You've described the process.
The old Soviet process.
The old Soviet process. And you've described it as illegitimate. If this goes to trial and you get convicted, like how would you respond in the middle of a presidential campaign?
Well,
how would
it's
you
so off. The statute of limitations are years off. It's hard to believe. You know, usually when you have something like this, the Democrats say, oh, he's terrible, guilty. The Democrats have even said, I'm innocent. I watched some of these, I think it was Andrew McCabe, the FBI guy who I fired. He came out, he said, they've got no case. They've all come out and said it. And then you've had Andrew McCarthy, you've had Jonathan Turley, Greg Jarrett, Dershowitz, all of them, everybody, like, and they're, you know, down the middle people. They see it, they say, there's no crime. There's no anything. Think of it, Tucker. I've been through 7 years of bull investigations. 7 years. They've looked at, I have a very big company, much bigger than they understand. In fact, when they finally got my taxes, they said, whoa. You know, they took them years to get the taxes. They got them. That was the last you ever heard. You never heard one thing about them. But it took them years to get them because they shouldn't be looking at my taxes. I was surprised the Supreme Court gave them the right. They shouldn't be looking at people. That's sort of another one of the tenets. You don't do that. But I didn't care that much. I just, on principle, I fought them. And they looked. I built a great company. When you do the things that I do, and you employ thousands and thousands of people over the years, just thousands, we've done a great job. And then I ran for president. People were surprised that I won, but I used to see these rallies, and I'll tell you, the rallies are bigger now. The enthusiasm is more now than I've ever seen. So what do you think, since your poll numbers have risen consistently since they raided this place, Mar-a-Lago? Well, before they raided.
In August.
They were going up substantially before.
Well, they definitely moved after
Since then, they've really been going up.
So how do you think that your opponents will respond?
I don't know how well. We have two opponents. We have a primary opponent. We have a general election opponent.
I mean the Democratic Party using the legal system.
Well, what they're doing is they're finding, and think of this, they say 11 million pages, but whatever it is, through all of these Democrats' investigations. I had the Mueller hoax. I had impeachment hoax number 1, impeachment hoax number 2. Ukraine, 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 Russia, Russia, Russia. You knew the Russia, Russia, Russia. I got that whole term from you. Russia, Russia, Russia. You'd be screaming it and say, this guy's a comedian. But you remember that whole period of time.
Quite Russia. Well.
It turned out to be a total fake. But think of this. You know, I tell this story very seldom, but because it's a sad story. So the Russia, Russia, Russia hoax was made up by crooked Hillary Clinton, Adam Schiff, the DNC, the Democrat Party. The dossier is a total fake thing. We're suing them now, as you know, on that. We're suing them a lot because, unfortunately, Bill Barr didn't have the courage to do what he should have done. He was so afraid of being impeached. So I have to do it civilly. I have to sue people. The Justice Department should have done, because these are criminals. But think of this. So you have all of these millions and millions of pages, and they get you on a non-disclosure agreement? I mean, big numbers, billions and billions of dollars, right? And they get you on a perfect non-disclosure agreement, or they get you on nothing. A friend of mine who's a big business guy said, you have to be the most honest guy in the world, because with all of those numbers that you have and those big numbers, they don't have anything. And you have to see, take a look at the people I just mentioned. Look, read what they said. There was no crime. In fact, a lot of people saying he indicted somebody. There's no crime. That's illegal to do. You know what he did. So I don't see it going. I mean, we'll have to see.
So, but just to bottom line it, I mean, the purpose of this is to keep you out of the presidential race.
If I weren't running, or if I had bad poll numbers, let's say.
Right.
And again, remember, the Democrats are the party of disinformation. If they want you to run, if they want to run against somebody, they're going to go the opposite. For instance, they don't want to run against me. And now, I just gave you a poll. I'm 9 points up on Biden. But they're the party of disinformation. So what they say is, oh, we want to run against Trump. Now, they always do that. You know, they do that. And other people would do it, but they do it pretty much better than others.
Is there anything they could throw at you legally that would convince you to drop out of the race? If you get convicted in this case in New York,
no, I'd never drop out. No, I'd never drop. It's not my thing. I wouldn't do it.
No, I'd never drop out, he said, bottom lining it for us. Donald Trump spent 4 years in office taking what was considered a very tough stand on China, and with that in mind, his descriptions of a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping at Mar-a-Lago were remarkably nuanced and even affectionate. Really interesting story. Xi, by the way, apparently speaks English secretly. You'll hear it right after the break. Welcome back from windy Palm Beach, Florida. We spent more than an hour with Donald Trump today, and we were struck throughout the course of the conversation how his grasp of foreign policy, this man who was supposedly stupid, his understanding of world affairs is so much more nuanced and sophisticated and pro-American than the moronic neocons currently in charge. It was remarkable. Let's send all our ammo to Ukraine. Zelensky's like Churchill. Okay. Trump disagrees with that, and some of the stories he told us from his time as president were amazing. Trump and Chairman Xi having chocolate cake at Mar-a-Lago. That's the setup. Here's the payoff.
I told China, if you buy any oil from Iran, President Xi, very good conversations. I liked him a lot. I told him we shot 57 missiles into Syria while he was having chocolate cake. It's the only time he said, repeat. That was the only word I've ever heard him say in English, meaning he speaks English, okay? You know?
He speaks English?
Well, I'll tell you what. This is an interesting thing. We're having dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and he wanted to be at Mar-a-Lago. We had a great weekend. But we're having dessert now, beautiful chocolate cake at Mar-a-Lago. He had his people. I had mine. He was telling me stories about China, the history of China. It's very amazing. It's got an amazing 5,000 years, amazing history. And President Obama didn't go over the red line, and because of that, Russia took over Syria, and there's a whole big thing, right? You know that. If Obama would have done what he said he was going to do, because they were killing children. They were killing children with gas bombs, by the hundreds, by the thousands in Syria. And he said, if that happens again, and it happened a number of times, and he still never went over the line, but I did. So I shot 57 missiles, almost every one of them hit, into a military area, which had a lot of planes, wiped out a lot of planes, also had Russian soldiers, by the way. They say I was so nice to Russia, right? I killed the pipeline. I sadly killed a lot of Russian soldiers, that 500 group, because they were doing things that they weren't supposed to. Nobody writes that, and I don't want them to write it. I'm not proud of it, but we did that, as you know. But we shot approximately 57 missiles. And so when I dealt with President Xi, I was with him the whole weekend. He had an incredible, I'm not allowed to say it because it's very impolite and very politically incorrect, a beautiful female interpreter. She was very beautiful. Today, if you say it, they'll say, this is terrible. You're not allowed to say that. But she was very professional. She spoke every word for him. Very professional. Had another couple of them, too. But she was there, and we're having dinner. And he would come in and say hello. She would say hello. He wouldn't say any word. But I said to him, a general came up and said, do we do it now? I said, yeah, you have to do it now. So I gave the order during dinner. Then I said, well, do I tell him? Because they're very closely associated with Syria. Do I tell him now, or do I wait till he finds out after dinner? Because you have about 28 minutes before they hit. So I said, President, we've just fired approximately 57 missiles into Syria, into a base. The missiles are on their way right now. He looked at me and goes, repeat. That's the only time he's ever said it. So I think he speaks English. The only word, he never said hello or goodbye. He only dealt through an interpreter. The only word I ever heard him say was repeat. That's an unusual word. I said,
how smart is he? Could you tell?
Top of the line.
Top of the line.
Yeah, they're all top of the line. Our guy's not top of the line. Never was. These are top of the line people at the top of their game. President Xi is a brilliant man. If you went all over Hollywood to look for somebody to play the role of President Xi, you couldn't find it. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. We had a great relationship. You know, when he first came to Mar-a-Lago, he came the first day. He was there for a few days. We were going to have it was so organized by them and by us, but by them. Very boom, boom, boom. Everything's like business, no games, you know. They don't say, gee, how did the Yankees do last night? Oh, that was a wonderful. They don't care. They don't care about anything. I said, do you ever go to a Broadway play? I'll take you to one. Do you ever have plays like, do you ever go? No, I don't. No. This is business. These aren't game players, right? I like it. You know, in a way I like it. You have no life, but that's what he likes.
Yeah.
Top of the line smart, top of the line. When they came in, it was supposed to be a meeting that lasted exactly 15 minutes. Then we go to breakout sessions they had like 40 people, we had 40 people. You know, the comparables, right? And we're sitting across the table from each other in the ballroom of Mar-a-Lago. And it was an amazing scene. But our meeting was supposed to take 15 minutes. It took 4 hours. We got along so well. There was a great chemistry we had. Great. We talked about everything. A great chemistry. But people ask me, how smart is she? I said, top of the line. You never met anybody smarter. How smart is Kim Jong-un? Top of the line. You know, people say, oh, this and that. Really smart. You know, when you come out and as a young man at 24, 23, even though he sort of inherits it, most people, when they inherit, they lose it. And that's easy stuff. He took over a country of very smart people, very, very energetic people, very tough people, at a very young age, and he has total dominant control. That's not easy. These are very smart. Putin, very smart. Now, he's had, in probably a bad year. Don't forget, that whole thing is not, if he took over all of Ukraine. And what are we going to do? Because Biden is so committed to Ukraine. What happens if it's a not winnable war? You know, there are people that say Ukraine cannot win, can't beat Russia. Russia right now, I'm not saying anything out of school. I read it in one of our newspapers, so, you know, it's probably fake news, but maybe not. I don't think it is. Russia right now is making massive amounts of ammunition. Sounds simple, right? But they're making massive, beyond anything they've ever made before. We don't have any ammunition. We've given it to Ukraine. We're not prepared to fight. I rebuilt our military, new planes, new tanks, new everything. They've taken the military that I've rebuilt, and they've given it all to Ukraine. I mean, massive amounts.
So who blew up Europe's biggest natural gas pipeline? We asked Trump. He would know, and he does. That's next. So the lunatics in the Biden administration promised to blow up Europe's biggest natural gas pipeline, and then Europe's biggest natural gas pipeline got blown up. Who did it? You're not allowed to ask questions, but we wanted to know what Donald Trump thought. He might know. Here he is. Who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
I don't want to get our country in trouble, so I won't answer it. But I can tell you who it wasn't, was Russia. How about when they blamed Russia? You know, they said Russia blew up their own pipeline. You got a kick out of that one, too. It wasn't Russia.
Pretty diplomatic answer for a man who's supposed to be crazy. We're going to play the full clip for you tomorrow night. That's it for us here in hurricane season in Palm Beach. Here's the great Sean Hannity to take over. And welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Once you decide that human beings are gods, with the power to rewrite history, biology, and nature, the power to shape reality itself, once you decide that, there's no reason to stop at sex changes. Transgenderism is certainly faddish at the moment. None of us can stop talking about it. But men magically morphing into women is not the final stage of anything. Instead, it's the first of many similar movements that are on the way inevitably. And the few visionaries who have grasped this obvious truth weirdly have not been welcomed by Blue America. They have been mocked and derided, as prophets always are. A few years ago, for example, a blue-eyed blonde woman from Montana called Rachel Dolezal declared that she was black because she decided that she was black. Blackness was Rachel Dolezal's lived experience. But she was not greeted as a liberator. She was almost immediately booed off the stage, and then she disappeared. And yet, tellingly, none of the people yelling at Rachel Dolezal ever explained why she couldn't be black. Why not? In this country, you can change your sex, but not your race? Really? How does that work? What species of science are we talking about here? It was not a defensible argument. And so over time, like all indefensible arguments, it will collapse. Someday, the New York Times will give Rachel Dolezal its coveted Glass Ceiling Award for her courage in the face of prejudice. That will happen. But before it does, we'd like to highlight some of the early adopters of our new civic religion, where each of us is God of the universe with utter dominion over nature. These are the trailblazers, the pathfinders, the Daniel Boones of progressive identity politics. One of them is a man called Justin Pearson. Pearson has been in the news recently for helping to facilitate an insurrection at the Tennessee State House. You may have seen him. But you may not know what Justin Pearson was like before his transition. Back in 2016, Justin Pearson was an earnest young student at Bowdoin, the whitest college in the whitest state in America, a place that costs 60 grand a year for no obvious reason. A rich kid's school. Here's what Justin Pearson looked like then as he ran for president of student government. I want to bring everyone together, said Justin Pearson, in a voice that if you closed your eyes, you could easily imagine coming from a suburban orthodontist. Justin Pearson wasn't white, that's probably how he got into Bowdoin in the first place, but he did a fantastic impression of it. What a nice young man. Has he considered the apprenticeship program at Citibank? That was the old Justin Pearson before his transition. Here he is now on the floor of the Tennessee State House.
All hope seemed to be lost. Representatives were thrown out of the State House. Democracy seemed to be at its end. Seemed like the NRA and gun lobbyists might win. But oh, that was good news for us. I don't know how long this Saturday in the state of Tennessee might last. But oh, we have good news, folks. We've got good news that Sunday always comes.
Justin Pearson has a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, everyone will do exactly what he wants or else face indictment by the Department of Justice. Justin Pearson has changed quite dramatically, as you can see. He transitioned from a crypto white kid into the modern incarnation of Martin Luther King Jr. himself. It's remarkable, really. But he's not alone in that. You see this all the time. Everybody in the Democratic Party wants to be Martin Luther King at this point. Even Joe Biden, who during the famous March on Washington was enjoying the many benefits of life as a college student in a racially segregated state. Now, he's MLK. They all are. But you got to ask yourself, as long as we're mimicking civil rights leaders who died almost 60 years ago, why not some variety? You never see politicians transition into, say, Malcolm X. Why is that? Maybe because Malcolm X didn't talk like a sharecropper. He spoke dignified standard English. He wasn't running a shakedown racket to fleece guilty white liberals. Malcolm X had self-respect, so he despised guilty white liberals, and he said so. He believed in self-improvement. He knew who the enemy was. So maybe it's not surprising that Malcolm X is not a popular transition choice in 2023. Al Sharpton, by contrast, is increasingly popular, especially now that he's skinny and has a paying job. Sandy Cortez of Westchester recently pulled off a double transition. Not only did she change sexes, Al Sharpton identifies as a man, but races as well. Here she is unveiling her new self in front of Sharpton's own National Action Network.
I'm proud to be a bartender. Ain't nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with working retail, folding clothes for other people to buy. There is nothing wrong with preparing the food that your neighbors will eat.
Oh, girl, go.
There is nothing wrong with driving the buses that take your family to work.
Ain't nothing wrong with that. In other words, yo, my brother, sup? That's not bad for a girl who grew up in an all-white suburb in leafy Westchester County as the daughter of the president of an architectural firm. But don't mention any of that. That's dead naming. These days, she'd like a gin and juice with salsa and frijoles, because Sandy Cortez doesn't just transition once, she keeps transitioning. She's a cutting-edge shapeshifter who collects identities the way Imelda Marcos did shoes. So she started life as a privileged white girl, then became a middle-aged black man engaged in the civil rights movement, and then in October, she transformed effortlessly into a Latinx cartoon character. Watch this.
Listen, all right, listen, okay.
Okay, I cut you. You may call that fraudulent, she calls it transitioning. They don't talk like that in Westchester County. But she learned this from the very best. Barack Obama paved the way. Obama grew up with his white mother and white grandparents from Kansas in an apartment in Honolulu, a city that has approximately 0 black people. Then he moved to Indonesia, then California and New York. But at some point, Barack Obama decided he didn't want to be any of the things he actually was, so he transitioned. He became, because you can do this now, an African-American Baptist pastor from Chicago with deep roots in Mississippi. Here's Barack Obama post-transition in December.
If John Lewis, even in his 70s, wasn't tired, I got no excuses. I can't be tired. If the men and women who had to endure the sting of discrimination, the smack of billy clubs, weren't tired. If the folks who had to fight those early fights, those were the tough fights for union rights and voting rights and gay rights and women's rights, if they didn't get tired, you can't be tired.
Barack Obama is sick and tired of being sick and tired. It was the smack of the billy clubs in Honolulu that did it. It was the fire hoses and snarling German shepherds at Harvard Law School. At some point, Obama crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge of his mind and transitioned into Ralph Abernathy, except an atheist and much thinner. But Hillary Clinton was there first. She transitioned when he didn't even know what the word meant. And in some ways, Hillary made an even longer journey. She was identified by an obstetrician at birth as the daughter of an executive from the suburban Midwest. But inside, she always knew she was very different from that. She was trapped inside a body that wasn't hers. But it wasn't until 2007 that Hillary Clinton finally mustered the courage to identify as what she was all along, a politically aware gospel singer from the segregated South. Here she is on the Chitlin Circuit in Alabama.
I don't feel no ways tired. I come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me that the road would be easy.
Performing tonight, ladies and gentlemen, at Constitution Hall. Joe Biden actually was born in a slave state, and as we mentioned, for the first nearly 30 years of his life, enjoyed all the many perks of living in a Jim Crow city. But that's not a story that audiences are interested in hearing a lot about at this point. So Joe Biden did what we are all now allowed to do in modern America. He erased his former identity. You saw this recently with the trans admiral. He declared it never happened. You can't know what happened. It's a dead name. And he transitioned into something else. So Joe Biden still grew up in a segregated state, but now he was the one at the back of the bus, feeling the thump of the billy club, the sting of the fire hose. Joe Biden is now black. Watch.
A senator from Florida going after Medicare and Social Security? I tell you what, I don't know where, as they say in Southern, don't know where you all been. Hot damn, boy.
Hot damn. Hot damn. And at no time in his life did Joe Biden ever support segregated schools in Delaware, contrary to what Kamala Harris told us during the Democratic debates last time. Kamala Harris has forgotten all about that because it never happened. And in Kamala Harris's case, there's a whole palette of identities to choose from. So here you have someone who is the daughter, technically, or was identified at birth as the daughter of a Jamaican college professor and an Indian college professor who grew up in Canada, in Montreal, Quebec. So actually, Kamala Harris can be essentially anything she wants. And 2 years ago, she transitioned and became a baguette eating, beret-wearing, bicycle-riding French lady. Here she is. In France, we call it fromage and speak in broken English. It's too bad the Ukrainian accent is so hard to master, because a lot of these people would already have transitioned into refugees from Kyiv. Well, we're learning tonight from a leak from the Department of Justice to the Washington Post that the special counsel investigating Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, is now looking into whether he committed wire fraud. Okay, so as his numbers go up, the number of investigations multiply. This one appears to be related to Trump's fundraising efforts between the 2020 election and January 6th. Of course, this is an effort to sideline the frontrunner in the Republican Party while they figure out what to do with Joe Biden. Meanwhile, Trump is talking in a way that nobody else is about the most serious threat to this country, which is nuclear war. A nuclear war that the Biden administration seems intent on sparking through recklessness and truly crazy behavior. And then, of course, the second greatest threat to the United States, the other thing you never hear about as we yammer on about trans rights, is the decline of the U.S. dollar. We interviewed Donald Trump yesterday in Florida, and that came up. Here's part of the conversation.
Iran gets together with Saudi Arabia through China. And China's taken over. And China, you know, I heard a couple of people say, well, the dollar will never lose the dollar standard. Are they kidding? China wants to change the standard, the currency standard. And if that happens, that's like losing a world war. We'll be a second-tier country. We'll literally be a second-tier country if that happens. Now, you're losing Brazil. You're losing Colombia, South America. You're losing Iran. You've lost it. You've lost Russia. And if you haven't lost them yet, you're going to lose them. China's on the yuan, so China's gone. Then you see France going over and all. What's going on? We're losing. If we lose our currency, that's the equivalent of losing a world war. Our currency is what makes us powerful and strong. And this was unthinkable during the Trump administration. And if I saw Macron do that, I would have called him. I would have said, you know what? No more wine into the United States. No more champagne into the. And I had that with him. You know, I had Steve Mnuchin, a good guy, was unable to make a deal with France. France is very difficult, I will tell you.
Yeah.
They're all difficult because every country rips us off. But France is, in particular, very difficult. And you probably heard where they want to charge American companies substantial tax to do business in France. So I had Mnuchin working on it and other people working. They were unable to do it. They called me back. This for a couple of months. They could not do it. I said, let me have Macron get him on the phone. I said, listen, I understand you're going to tax American companies for doing business in France. Here's the story. On Monday morning, if you don't drop this, on Monday morning was Friday, I'm going to put a 100% tariff on every bottle of champagne and every bottle of wine that comes into the United States of America. He says, no, 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 that's not fair. I said, of course it's fair. You're charging American companies for going to France and doing business in France, a very big tax. So all of your wine, very good wine, but I think we make wine that's just as good. All of your wine and all of your champagne that comes in, I'm putting a 100% tax on. That's it. So good luck. Monday morning at 9 o'clock. That was it. I get a call back 15 minutes later. We've decided we're not going to charge American companies. But you know what happened? Once I left, now they're charging them.
So the takeaway from the interview we did with Trump yesterday, lasted over an hour, was whatever you think of his answers, the conversation was about real topics. It was not about global warming or systemic racism or trans rights. It was about nuclear war, the U.S. dollar and its strength against other currencies, our trade balance, the things that actually define a country. They told you he was crazy for all these years, but why is he the only one talking about these things? Charlie Hurt is opinion editor of the Washington Times. He joins us tonight with reaction to this. Charlie, thanks so much for coming on. Did you find it refreshing to hear someone, whether you agree with him or not, talk about things that might actually define our grandchildren's lives?
Well, like you said a minute ago, you know, he's talking about things that nobody else is talking about. And of course, when was the last time somebody was doing that? Well, that was when Donald Trump in 2016 was running the first time. He was talking about things that nobody else was talking about in Washington. And I think, you and I agree, these people are desperate to ignore these issues and ignore these topics. And as you say, whatever you think of Donald Trump, he's a very smart businessman, and he's probably the shrewdest political observer that we've seen in this country on the political stage in a lifetime. And when he, and I thought it was so interesting the degree to which he focused on foreign policy and identified that the great threat for us is indeed foreign policy. And when you look at the fact that in 2 years since he's been gone, the Biden administration has given away our energy independence. It has launched a whole new war. It has eroded our standing in the world to the point that China and Russia have aligned against us. And they're frittering away the U.S. dollar. And all of this is from Joe Biden, who for 50 years has been the reigning foreign policy expert in Washington. The whole reason he got picked as vice president is because he was the biggest genius at foreign policy that Washington ever produced. And then you have this guy who's a real estate reality TV mogul who walks in and calls their BS at every turn. And it turns out he's right about all of it. Donald Trump is the best statesman when it comes to foreign policy, especially that we've had in decades.
We're closer to nuclear annihilation than any time in the history of nuclear weapons right now. And all the liberals are ignoring it. And it falls to Trump to remind us of that. I've never seen anything crazier than this. Charlie Hurt, appreciate your perspective as always. Thank you.
Great to see you, bud.
By the way, this administration just committed the single most profound act of environmental terrorism, blowing up Western Europe's natural gas pipeline and sending more CO2 into the atmosphere than has ever been emitted into the atmosphere. They won't admit that they did that. They did do it. We asked Donald Trump who he thinks did it. We'll show you his response in just a moment. State media outlets like National Public Radio and the British Broadcasting Corporation, NPR and BBC, are very upset that Elon Musk has taken over Twitter. An open Twitter is a massive threat to them, and they know that. Of course, they can't survive if there are real options. So a reporter from the BBC just sat down with Elon Musk and tried to attack him for extremism and hate speech in an interview last night. What happened next is really something you have to see. Fox's Trace Gallagher brings it to us now. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, this is the BBC's technology reporter James Clayton, who during his interview with Elon Musk failed to implement a couple of journalism 101 rules like never state a fact you can't back up and do your homework. Had Clayton done his homework, he would have learned that back in December, Elton John quit Twitter because the singer claimed the platform was allowing unchecked misinformation, to which Elon Musk responded tweeting, "I love your music, hope you come back. Is there any misinformation in particular that you're concerned about?" Elton John went silent. And yet, this BBC reporter went down the very same path, suggesting Elon Musk doesn't have enough staff to police hate speech. Watch.
You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and I
honestly how did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
You can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
then I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I claimed.
You just lied.
Yeah. And Musk is right. Clayton and others also suggest the rise in hate speech on Twitter is content that's slightly racist or sexist, but again, very unclear exactly who is deciding that this content is slightly some type of ist. Tucker.
Great question. Speech they hate. Trace Gallagher, thanks so much.
You bet.
So the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, the natural gas pipeline that carried, well, natural gas from East to West Europe, was the single most profound act of environmental terrorism in history. It released more deadly CO2 into the atmosphere. It was also an attack on our NATO allies. Our NATO allies are the beneficiaries of that natural gas pipeline. Germany, which is the core of European NATO, suffered. So the Biden administration was talking about how much it loves NATO, attacked NATO, and they did it. They promised to carry it out. They haven't really denied that they did it. So during an interview with Donald Trump yesterday, we thought we'd ask, who does he think did it? We previewed the answer last night. Here's the full exchange. Who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
I don't want to get our country in trouble, so I won't answer it. But I can tell you who it wasn't, was Russia. How about when they blamed Russia? You know, they said Russia blew up their own pipeline. You got a kick out of that one, too. It wasn't Russia. So I won't answer the question only because I don't want to get our country any deeper than they already are. But it sort of all starts. We have, we have the most incredible equipment. I rebuilt our whole military. We have things that are, you can do anything. We're equipped to do anything, but I refuse to say it because I want our country to be pristine. But it was, in many ways, blowing it up was very bad because it really created a lot of problems for Europe in terms of the cost of energy.
Oh, yeah.
But they shouldn't have ever been. I had that pipeline stopped, Nord Stream 2, I had it stopped, totally stopped. When Biden came in, he approved it, and they immediately started the finishing action. I had Nord Stream because I said, for Germany and Europe to get their energy from Russia, that was when I said, I sent Angela Merkel the flag. I sent her the white flag of surrender. She said, but why do you do that? I said, you've been fighting Russia for many years. If you ever have to fight with Russia and they control energy, you might as well just take the white flag of surrender. And that's what I did. So that was blown up and very dangerous to do it. But I think most people know who did it.
So once we start blowing up other people's critical infrastructure, is there a concern ours could get blown up in return?
Well, I think it's much more than infrastructure you're talking about. Look, we could end up in World War III over this whole thing. Forget about pipeline. We are closer. I believe it's the most dangerous period of time in history. Number one, because we have people on top that are incompetent. That's number one. And again, China's fine if you know how to deal. Russia, if you know how to deal. Russia wasn't going into Ukraine with me. China wasn't going into Taiwan with me. I mean, now all you see is, China with ships all over the place and sending airplanes and bombers. That wasn't happening with me. He knew you can't do it. And also, Russia knew you can't do it. They would have never done it. The most dangerous period of time because of weaponry, because of nuclear, because of weaponry, most dangerous period of time in the history of our country and in the history of the world right now. And we have an incompetent person at the top.
Douglas Macgregor is a retired colonel from the U.S. Army. He joins us tonight to assess. Doug, thanks so much for coming on. The Biden people never stop yammering on about NATO, the sacred alliance that is NATO. They never define really what it is, but it's so important, NATO. They just committed an act of war against NATO. Toria Nuland and the lunatics in this administration. It's very obvious that they did that. How does NATO survive this?
Tucker, NATO is not surviving this. That's very obvious. If you go behind the scenes, there's enormous division in NATO over what should happen next. And more of the truth is coming out about Ukraine. Not only are the Ukrainians not winning, people are discovering that the Ukrainians were turned into a weapon of mass destruction aimed at Russia by us. And this is something the Europeans really never signed up for. So the president is absolutely right. The other thing is that the president gave you a very prudent answer. He said he really didn't know, and that's true. We can't know unless we receive a briefing from the highest levels. But he's also very concerned that if he were to say yes, that would put our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines all over the world at risk. They would instantly become targets overnight for the very reason that you pointed out, it's an act of war. An act of war potentially against Russia and also against Germany.
But I thought Germany was our main ally in this war against Russia, and that the alliance between the United States and Germany called NATO was sacrosanct. Like, how could they do this?
Well, our alliance with Germany is more important than anything happening in eastern Ukraine, and that's a fact. The Germans are not only hugely important to us as trading partners, but we have worked for years, and they have worked very hard as well, to build great confidence across national lines. Germany is the foundation for European power. Without it, the EU is out of business. Without Germany, NATO is out of business. I don't know what the future holds, but I can't imagine a wrecking crew anywhere in the world that could have done more damage to our interests in Europe in a shorter time than the Biden administration.
Nicely put. It's sad to hear that, but it's so obviously true. The reckless lunatics, that's not an overstatement. Doug McGregor, thank you very much for your very knowledgeable assessment. So we played you a lecture the other day from the Vice President of Marketing at Bud Light and told you the beer brand needs to update its fratty image because fratty is bad. Those little entitled white men. Well, it turns out this very entitled white lady has a history that's pretty fratty herself. And we've got the pictures, the frattiest possible history, actually. That's next. One theme that unites almost every story we've seen for the past 3 years, it's the people in charge despising the people they're in charge of. Politicians despising their voters, preachers despising their congregation, generals despising their infantry, officers, and enlisted men. So it shouldn't surprise you that the Bud Light executive in charge of Bud Light hates people who drink Bud Light and thinks really they should all become transsexual. Here she is.
So I had this super clear mandate. It's like we need to evolve and elevate this incredibly iconic brand. What does evolve and elevate mean? It means inclusivity. It means shifting the tone. We had this hangover. I mean, Bud Light had been kind of a brand of fratty, kind of out of touch humor, and it was really important that we had another approach.
Yeah, fratty is bad. They're just so entitled. That's the word from Alyssa Heinerscheid, who went to Harvard, where it turns out she has something of a fratty past herself. Henry Rogers of the Daily Caller somehow got these pictures of that same person at school in 2006. And you can see she's blowing up condoms, and no, that's not in a biology class. That's in some kind of fratty setting. So how's Bud Light doing, the brand she's partly in charge of? Well, it's lost more than $5 billion in market cap since going trans. Was it worth it? Of course it was. Candace Owens is the host of Candace. She joins us tonight to respond. Hope you weren't a Bud Light investor, Candace.
Fortunately, I was not and am not. And I will say this, nothing says I hate fratty quite like blowing up a condom at a booze fest, which is exactly what she's doing in those photos. You can't make this up. But I am going to have to defend her because, listen, she's lying because she has to lie. Of course, she enjoys a frat culture. Of course, she had a good time while she was in college like every other person. But now, to survive in woke culture, you have to become a liar. You have to pretend that you think fat is beautiful. You have to pretend to be race obsessed. You have to pretend that you think Dylan Mulvaney is a woman and should be included in female spaces. We are being told that you have to lie repeatedly in order to survive in corporate culture. And she is herself a victim of that and a perpetuator of that. So yeah, it's absolutely shameful, and she should feel ashamed that she brought this idea to Bud Light. But I do believe that she was conditioned. I mean, she went to Harvard. What do we think goes on? What do we believe is the sociology of people that graduate Harvard? They're basically being told that this is the way that they should think. And there's one more thing I want to say here, Tucker, because it's deeply upsetting to me. There is a post-analysis that needs to happen here on why it is that Dylan Mulvaney for 365 days was able to openly mock women, to openly take the spaces of women, to get contracts from Ulta Beauty, to take, contracts from other women and all these sponsorships, and nobody cared until suddenly Dylan Mulvaney traversed into a male space and it became unacceptable. Why? Because men don't tolerate this level of lies in the way that women do, right? We respond emotionally and not rationally. We should have been the ones to put an end to Dylan Mulvaney, but we didn't because we feel bad. And shouldn't we just feel bad for men that want to be women and mock us and put on lipstick and pigtails and call themselves a girl? I think not, Tucker, but woke culture says yes.
As usual, you've taken it to a much deeper, more profound level than I had thought through. That is so, I mean, in one sentence, it's pretty amazing that the battle of sexes has been won by men with the help of feminists, isn't it?
Yeah, it is absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, once again, men have to rescue women from this terrible ideology that is taking place right now, and I commend men for doing that.
The great Candace Owens, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So you remember the Jussie Smollett hoax, which wasn't just a hoax, it was really a metaphor for so many things. But we decided to speak to the people who are implicated in that hoax, the two men, the boxers from Chicago that Jussie Smollett paid to beat him up, the Osundario brothers. Great guys, actually. We sat down with them for an episode of Tucker Carlson today, which you definitely have to watch. Here's part of it.
He started it off by saying that they sent him a hate letter to Empire, and he wasn't happy with the response the studio was giving him, like they weren't taking it seriously. So after saying that, he now told me, I want you to attack me. And I was confused. I was just looking at him in shock, like, okay, what else? He said, yeah, I want you to fake beat me up. And I said, okay, cool. So then he asked me, do I have somebody else that will do it? And then he said, okay, I think you should use your brother. Can we use your brother? I said, sure, yeah, why not?
So he goes and tells me about the hate letter that he got and how they weren't taking it seriously, and that he wants us to pretend to beat him up.
He really did not like President Trump at the time, and he was one of his biggest critics. Jussie came up with the words we were gonna say, so should I say the words?
I hope you will.
Okay, so he came up with the call me Empire.
Yeah.
He
came up with that specifically?
Yeah, specific. He wanted to hit those key points. You have to say this is MAGA country. And yeah, all those
He wanted
words.
us to get the red hats. He's the one that told us to get the red hats. He wanted us to get MAGA hats, but
we didn't have time. We didn't know where to get MAGA hats.
So,
Turns out it was hard to find a MAGA hat in downtown Chicago. Nobody told Robin Roberts of ABC News that, though. She thought the story was beautiful, Jussie, beautiful. The amazing Osundario brothers. That conversation right now on Fox Nation. So at the height of the COVID hysteria, when no one was allowed to say anything true, our friend Alex Berenson decided he was going to say true things anyway. He was one of the very few reporters, one of the only reporters who told the truth. And as a result of that commitment, the White House and Pfizer tried to get Twitter to ban him, and they succeeded. Now, Alex Berenson is suing the White House over this. 2 days ago, a 25-year-old man called Connor Sturgeon opened fire in a bank in Louisville, Kentucky. Sturgeon shot 13 people. He murdered 5 of them before police took him down. Today, Sturgeon's parents issued a statement saying their son had a diagnosed mental illness and had been receiving treatment from a psychiatrist. Sturgeon's parents offered no details about any of this, and as far as we know, they were never asked. But we would like to ask, what drugs was Connor Sturgeon taking when he committed mass murder? That seems like a relevant question. It's certainly more relevant than the endless circular debate over gun control that's once again being inflicted on the rest of us. The percentage of Americans who own guns has not risen during our lifetimes. In fact, it has fallen. Meanwhile, the percentage of Americans who are taking powerful psychiatric drugs prescribed by doctors, SSRIs, benzodiazepines, amphetamines under brand names like Adderall, and now brain-altering cross-sex hormones, that population has jumped by hundreds of percent. Its growth has tracked the rise of mass shootings, in fact. Is there a connection here? That's not a crazy question. What's crazy is ignoring the topic completely because you're taking huge money from Big Pharma, which peddles these drugs. That's what our media and political classes are doing right now, and it's shameful. And speaking of Big Pharma, during the mass panic, the hysteria over COVID and the vaccine mandates that followed, Alex Berenson, formerly of the New York Times, was one of the few reporters who dared to go where the facts led him to tell the truth. And because he did that, both the White House and Pfizer board member Scott Gottlieb urged Twitter to ban Alex Berenson from speaking. Now, Berenson is suing both the Biden administration and Scott Gottlieb. We think that suit dropped today. Alex Berenson is on Substack. In any case, he joins us tonight for an update. Alex, thanks so much for coming on. And people can read, I think, about this at much greater length on your Substack, but can you just summarize for us what this case is?
Sure. First of all, there's something I've done. I never have the chance to say it, Tucker, so I have to say it. Who's got two thumbs and sued the President of the United States today? This guy.
Nice.
So yes, I sued President Biden. I sued several White House officials. I sued Scott Gottlieb, and I sued the chairman of Pfizer, Albert Bourla. And what the lawsuit says, and I do go into this in greater detail on the stack, is that in 2021, the White House tried to get me banned from Twitter. That's pretty much a prima facie violation of my First Amendment rights. And there's a very, very important case actually involving Donald Trump, where the White House, where a judge said, "Hey, you can't ban people from commenting on Donald Trump's Twitter account." And to some extent, that's what the White House was trying to do. They were trying to prevent me from commenting on Joe Biden, prevent me from commenting on Andy Slavitt. You may remember 2 years ago at this time, Joe Biden's ridiculous press conference when he told people, or speech when he told people they could have barbecue if they were good. And you and I commented on that on Fox News. The White House did not want Twitter to let me make comments about things related to the vaccines, and they pushed Twitter to ban me. That didn't work because Twitter knew I was not violating its policies. And so Scott Gottlieb, who was a former FDA board member and the former commissioner of the FDA and a board member at Pfizer, stepped in and told Twitter to ban me, and then Twitter did. This is all outlined in great detail in this complaint. We have tremendous evidence about it. The only question is whether a court in New York State, a federal court, a federal judge, probably appointed by a Democratic president, is going to want to let this lawsuit go forward, because on the merits, it's very strong. And I want to say one more very, very important thing about this. Pfizer has tremendous immunity for any lawsuits around the vaccines. This lawsuit is probably the only lawsuit that can pierce this in a meaningful way and get all of us to have some idea of what Pfizer actually knew about the failure of the vaccines in 2021 and what they were telling the White House. If this lawsuit can survive the motion to dismiss, because the White House and Pfizer are going to do everything possible to suppress this lawsuit, it will provide discovery that nobody else is going to be able to get. So I'm really hopeful. It's going to be expensive, it's going to be hard, it's going to be messy, but I think we might be able to get there.
Certainly rooting for you. Government cannot silence critics of its own policies, period, in a free country. Alex Berenson, Godspeed.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. There's much fallout this evening, and there will be for months, stemming from the arraignment of the Republican frontrunner in Manhattan yesterday. And we're going to cover that in some detail. But we want to start tonight with a trend that we have noticed that might be worth knowing about, and it has to do with the dollar. For nearly 80 years since the end of the Second World War, the U.S. dollar has effectively been the currency of the world. For our entire lifetimes, there was virtually no place on the entire globe you could go that would turn down a 20. Andrew Jackson's face beside the famous seal of the U.S. Treasury was probably America's best-known export. From Dar es Salaam to Sri Lanka to the smallest gold mining outpost in the Amazon basin, every shopkeeper on earth recognized a $20 bill. The dollar was universal, and not just universal in commerce, though the majority of international transactions were conducted in dollars, but universally held as a long-term store of value globally. The world's central banks stockpiled U.S. dollars, far more than any other currency. Now, most Americans may not have known that, or they did, but it doesn't matter whether they knew it. It was very good for everyone who lives here. Because there were so many U.S. dollars in circulation outside of the country, the cost of borrowing money inside the country remained artificially low. And that's one of the reasons that in this country, America, middle-class people could buy their own homes. The U.S. government, meanwhile, was able to run up astronomical debts without many obvious consequences. Now, from time to time, the Congress would debate something called the debt ceiling, but it was abstract. For most people, the entire topic didn't seem very relevant to their lives because, for most of that time, it really wasn't. America printed the U.S. dollar, we controlled the global reserve currency, and that meant that for us, money was cheap. We had privileges that nobody else in the world had. It's been very nice, but what would happen if it ended? You don't even really want to think about that because the consequences would be too ugly, really ugly. But we started to worry about it about a year ago. really the day the Russian military rolled over the Ukrainian border. Now, by itself, that was a destabilizing event. War always is destabilizing and always challenges the existing order. But it was the West's reaction to the Russian invasion that seemed ominous. Policymakers in the U.S. went insane. Joe Biden, helped by his Republican allies in the Senate, appeared to be determined not simply to topple the Russian government in some kind of regime change war, but to blow up the post-war economic order that had served the U.S. so generously for so long. So we thought at the time that the real threat to our future wasn't just the billions we were sending to Zelensky. That was reckless, but probably not going to end America. The real threat was the unprecedented economic sanctions that Joe Biden was allowed to, in fact, encouraged to impose. Those sanctions, you'll recall, were supposed to hurt Russia. But even in March of last year, it seemed obvious they were going to hurt the United States much more than they hurt Russia. Here's what we said 13 months ago. We should prepare to lose our position as holder of the world's reserve currency. That is happening in slow motion. It's unmistakable. Now, the Biden people seem to have no idea this is going on, or maybe they want it to happen. Joe Biden was up there at the State of the Union bragging about how he took 30 points off the Russian ruble in a single day. Hooray, good for us! But once we stop celebrating our win, the destruction of the Russian economy, they deserve it. You got to wonder, is there a downside to this? Could it be a Pyrrhic victory? Let's see. These policies have driven Russia, China, India, Turkey, and other countries to accelerate their flight from the U.S. dollar. Now, to be clear, that's the majority of the global economy. This may be the most reckless and destructive thing any American president has ever done to the United States. So that was last year, and at the time, it was really just yelling into the wind. Those views were considered absurd, even treasonous. Biden and his Republican allies described sanctions against Russia as morally essential. So we seized oligarchs' yachts at anchor. We closed the Apple store in Moscow. We were all assured these were important victories, and anyone who asked questions about their long-term economic consequences was a Putin stooge. That was the consensus in Washington last spring, in case you've forgotten what it sounded like.
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence. But let's also recognize the unique nature of the sanctions that we have outlined. These are some of the greatest sanctions, if not the strongest, that we've ever issued.
The president believes that sanctions are intended to deter.
As to the sanctions, the most important thing we can do is to use them as a deterrent, as a means of dissuading Russia from engaging in further aggression.
We are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks in the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless.
These people are such buffoons, and all the Republican senators nodding in agreement. You watch that and you wonder if they really believe what they were telling you. If they really did believe that, they're stupider than they look. These sanctions were never going to work in the way they promised because, unlike the United States, Russia does not have a late-stage finance economy. Russian oligarchs do not get rich from credit default swaps. They get rich from selling actual things that people need in order to live. Oil, natural gas, iron, fertilizer, coal, wheat. By some measures, Russia has the largest resource economy in the world. Oh, okay. So they could barter if they needed to. So a year later, despite the sanctions you were told are the greatest ever devised, the Russian ruble is just as strong against the U.S. dollar as it was before the war in Ukraine. So we didn't really hurt Russia with those sanctions, certainly not long term. Who'd we hurt? Ourselves. E.J. Antoni and Peter St. Onge wrote an incisive piece in the Daily Caller last week that explains part of why this happened. Quote, a critical feature of a reserve currency is its apolitical nature, which Biden is now gutting. After both parties in Washington destroyed the dollar's stability with inflation, now the Biden administration has chosen to wield the dollar as a weapon. Together, these two factors send a message to foreigners, which is they should get out while they still can. In response to Russia's war with the Ukraine, the U.S. froze the dollar reserves of Russia's central bank. To be clear, these were not American assets. These were dollars owned by the Russian central bank and the Russian people. The seizure was intended to cause bank runs and collapse Russia's credit system. It didn't work. Instead, it exposed the Biden administration's willingness to violate the trillions of dollars that foreigners rightfully own. The danger of this precedent is difficult to overstate, end quote. Now, all of us saw that happening, but you couldn't say anything because Russia, bad. We can't even watch their hockey teams. All right. But what do you think happened next as we were jumping up and down and talking about Winston Churchill? Well, smart foreigners, and there are some, believe it or not, started to dump the U.S. dollar. Why? Because the U.S. dollar was no longer a reliable store of value. Suddenly, it was a political weapon that could be wielded at will against anyone who held it. So what if you had a border dispute with one of your neighbors that the State Department hadn't authorized? Or what if you accidentally criticized transgender theology and irritated the Human Rights Campaign? Well, the U.S. government might denounce you as immoral and then confiscate all your money. Because they just did that with Russia. And as a result, dollars began to look much less appealing to the rest of the world. And so de-dollarization began. And it has accelerated at remarkable speed, almost without comment in the American media, over the last year. So Russia announced it will conduct business in Asia, Africa, and Latin America in Chinese currency. Brazil, which has a brand new government supported by the Biden administration, announced it will do the same thing. Brazil, largest economy in the hemisphere after ours. Pakistan is doing the same thing. That's a longtime U.S. ally. India and Malaysia, two of the biggest economies in the world, announced they'll be settling their trade in their own currencies, not the dollar. Even France, which we liberated, is using Chinese currency in a new liquefied natural gas trade. China and Saudi Arabia are now major business partners. And again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is happening around the world, and all of it is shutting out the U.S. dollar. And it's happening a lot faster than anybody could have predicted. And yet no one in Washington seems aware that it is happening. So if you wanted the rest of the world to trust your currency, the last thing you would do is use it as a weapon or print too much of it. Printing too much of your currency causes inflation, and that saps the value of the currency. No one wants to hold a currency that is worth less consistently every year. That's sixth grade economics, but Joe Biden can't be bothered with that. So he's printing more money. Here he is last week announcing another $10 billion check. Not for you or East Palestine or anyone in our country who needs it, but for foreign governments.
Working in close cooperation with the United States Congress, we plan to add another $690 million for new funding for the presidential initiative over the next 2 years. And over the course of 3 years, my administration intends to work with Congress to commit $9.5 billion across all our efforts to advance democracy around the world. We're all safer when that occurs.
We've been asking for months for any Republican senator who supports this, whether it's Tom Tillis or John Cornyn of Texas, to come on the show and calmly explain why you support this. None of them have accepted our invitation. But at this point, you begin to wonder, what does the United States have that will retain its value over time? We should do an inventory of our assets. So Biden, as you just saw, is continuing to send the contents of our treasury, our dollars, to corrupt oligarchs in Eastern Europe and around the world. And yet at the very same time, and you should pay attention to this, he's selling off America's most valuable hard asset. That's our Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Because unlike the U.S. dollar, oil, which is in the reserve, has inherent value. Oil is the densest store of transportable energy known to man. So unlike fiat currencies like the dollar, oil will always have value. That's why Russia is not now impoverished, because they have a lot of oil. But we have less, because the SPR has been drained. In the last fiscal year, the Biden administration sold off 218 million barrels of oil, including bewilderingly, criminally, to the government of China. How much oil is that? It's more oil sold from the SPR in 1 year than in all previous years combined. So what happens when we empty it? Well, there's not much left. Oh, what about our gold? America's gold reserves have not been fully audited in generations. So they can say whatever they want, but the truth is we don't really know how much gold is in Fort Knox. So the SPR becomes even more vital, and now it's disappearing. And as it does, the power of the United States ebbs. At some point, what's going to be left? They'll be draining the Great Lakes and shipping the water to the Gobi Desert for cotton farming. They'll be selling the curtains. So how do you fix this? Well, ending the war in Ukraine immediately would help, which we could do. because we're in charge of NATO, but we're not even trying. In fact, we're pushing even harder for a direct conflict with nuclear-armed Russia. And politicians in Washington remain mired in their weird boomer World War II fantasies where they're all Winston Churchill and Zelensky's the head of the French resistance. We could give a million examples, but we can't resist, once again, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, last month.
I'm going to try to help explain to the American people that defeating the Russians in Ukraine is the single most important event going on in the world right now.
Defeating the Russians in Ukraine is not the single most important event in the world from the perspective of the United States. It's not even number 15 on the list. It's way below ending the importation of fentanyl into this country, and it's way, way below preserving the strength of the U.S. dollar. But if Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden and the rest of these reckless leaders have their way, an increasing number of countries will do what so many have already done, which is begin to reject the U.S. dollar. And what will happen then? Well, all those dollars will come home, and the value of our currency will plummet even further. And that will lead to poverty across the United States, and that will lead to the typical political and cultural volatility that inevitably follows economic collapse. Disaster. And we've seen it before. Of course, you know the famous pictures from Germany in the early 20s. Banknotes and wheelbarrows. When I buy a cup of coffee, that'll be 30 pounds of currency. Kids playing with worthless stacks of Deutschmarks. That was called Weimar, the Weimar Republic. And that government collapsed because of hyperinflation. And then economic collapse led to communist revolutions across Germany and ultimately to, fill in the blank, the Nazi regime. That's well known. In fact, it's a cliche at this point. But here's the thing that nobody seems to remember. What brought on the economic collapse that set the world on fire? Does anyone remember that? Why did the German government blow up its own currency? Well, simple. The German government took on too much debt in order to pay for a pointless war. Yes, a pointless war did that. And if that sounds familiar, it's because exactly what we have done repeatedly for decades. We did it in Vietnam. We did it in Iraq. We did it in Afghanistan. And every time we got away with it because uniquely we held the world's reserve currency. But this time could be very, very different. The war against Russia will be the last war we can afford to fight. Luke Groman is an economist. He joins us now. Luke, thanks so much for coming on. This seems to be happening kind of right in front of us for those who are paying attention, but I don't hear anybody talking about it, and I wonder why.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of talking about it outside of the niche Wall Street community. There's some chatter about it there, but there's not been a lot of talk about ultimately what I think was one of the biggest moments in finance and in the global economy since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, which was what you mentioned before, which was the U.S. freezing Russian FX reserves last spring.
So basically that was saying those are U.S. dollars, we printed those dollars, and even though there's been no court case and the people who own those dollars have not been implicated in a crime, we're taking them.
In essence, I think it is important to separate the dollar, which is the medium of exchange, from and the global reserve currency, and I think it'll remain the global reserve currency, from what has been since 1971 the primary reserve asset of the world, which are treasury bonds. Right. And the way the system has basically worked since 1971, and in particular since post-82, is that we have subjugated the U.S. defense industrial base, the U.S. middle and working classes, to support the value of the U.S. bond market on a real basis, because our biggest export were treasury bonds. It was great for Wall Street. It was great for Washington bureaucrats. That's what we exported. That system made sense. Quite frankly, from 71 to 89, it was critical in helping us win the Cold War. It was a big deal. After 89, when the USSR collapsed, we should have restructured the deal basically at that point. We did not, and instead we went NAFTA, and we went to China. You got China in the WTO. The net of it is that having the treasury bond as our primary reserve asset is no longer the asset. In fact, it's become a threat to national security.
Exactly. It's wiser to export steel and automobiles and refrigerators and not debt. I think in retrospect. Luke Groman, I appreciate your analysis. Thank you. So in doing that segment, we kind of took a break from what has got to be the news of the week, month, year, which is that Donald Trump is the Republican presidential frontrunner, and he was arraigned yesterday, and the coverage of that has dominated absolutely everything. And so we want to begin tonight with Fox's Kevin Corke, who's been monitoring the fallout from yesterday. Hey, Kevin.
Evening, Tucker. Supporters of the former president have not only given him a boost in recent polling, you and I have talked about that, they're also giving his campaign coffers quite a boost as well. In fact, the move by the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, to indict President Trump has both incensed and apparently inspired supporters of the 45th president. And apparently Team Trump is reveling in the rising tide of cash, raising at least $10 million since the indictment, including a stunning $4 million in the first 24 hours. And this is key. According to the Trump folks, around 25% of those who've actually given during this wave are first-time donors. What's more, some 16,000 people, Tucker, have actually signed up to be volunteers. Again, much of that in the first 24 hours following the indictment. And in yet another sign that the former president still packs quite a punch, especially when it comes to TV ratings. Last night's speech at Mar-a-Lago, aired right here on Fox in its entirety, drew 6.6 million viewers. That's more than double our closest competition, and more viewers in the key demo than other news networks combined, which happens a lot at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Tucker?
A lot of interest in that story, for sure.
Yeah.
Kevin Corke, thanks for that update. Appreciate it.
You bet.
So, as you probably saw, there was total chaos in New York City yesterday as Donald Trump turned himself in. I want to speak to someone who was on the ground there and then in Florida for his speech last night. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia joins us next. In the United States and really around the world, the last 24 hours have been dominated by conversation and reporting on the indictment of Donald Trump, but almost nowhere do you hear an analysis of what's in the indictment. You should look at it yourself. It's fascinating. There's nothing there. It doesn't list the crime that Donald Trump was supposedly concealing. Now, why is that significant? Because that crime allows the prosecutor to transform misdemeanors into 34 felony charges. It's Jesus in the loaves. Like out of nowhere, they multiply. How is that possible? Stephen Miller is a former advisor to Donald Trump. He's the founder of America First Legal. He joins us tonight to assess. Stephen Miller, thanks so much for coming on. I don't hear anyone talking about what's in the indictment, which is a little weird in a country governed by the rule of law.
Well, that's exactly right. And even repressive foreign adversaries of the United States, if they were going to persecute a chief political rival, would create a far more plausible and credible pretext for doing so. What's so remarkable, Tucker, is that the Manhattan DA's office felt completely confident that if they charged President Trump without even naming the law that he broke, that there would be no consequences for them, for their office, or anyone in their employ. They could continue on their merry way, become rich and famous, have wonderful careers, and practice law to great esteem all over the country and probably get some great book deals in the process. And the worst part is, Tucker, they're almost certainly correct in that assumption.
Well, that's the scariest part. I mean, if they'd accused him of murder or fentanyl dealing, opening the southern border and letting 100,000 Americans die of drug ODs or, actual crimes, at least you would understand why he was indicted. But you're right. This suggests they don't care what it looks like.
Yeah, the reality, Tucker, is that we've entered an era now where our system of law has been completely overtaken by radical left-wing warriors who use the law as an instrument to extract political consequences and to inflict political pain on their opponents. So our legal system has become completely tribalized and radicalized. This is something that George Washington warned about way back in his farewell address. When you have a society that becomes factionalized and is one faction versus another, then you are quickly on the road to despotism. The great failure of the conservative movement, Tucker, is its phony belief that words alone will protect us. Look, Iraq has a constitution similar to ours. Countries all around the world have words on paper that are very much the same as ours, fashioned after ours. And those people in those countries have no safety and no liberty and no justice because it is tribe versus tribe, Sunni versus Shia. The words do not protect us. Men of honor and decency and valor protect us. So when you have law schools and you have judges and you have DAs and you have attorney generals who reject the entire Western system of law, the words on the paper mean nothing. They will not protect you. They will not protect your family. They will not protect the country. And unless conservatives and Republicans get serious about understanding the scope and nature of this threat and stop just tweeting about it and memeing about it and talking about it and understand the scope of reaction that will be necessary to reclaim our legal system, then we're not only going to lose this fight, we're going to lose the whole entire country in the process.
Yeah. We need to take a big field trip to South Africa and see how that's doing. Almost 30 years later, their new constitution. Is it a free country, really? Would you want to live there? Stephen Miller, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it looked pretty crazy in New York yesterday. And of course, looking crazy was the whole point of this, to terrify swing voters into never voting for Donald Trump. What was it like? Well, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia was there for the arraignment. And before she arrived, the mayor of the city, already failed just a year into office, Eric Adams, described her as a criminal and implied he would punish her if she misbehaved. Meanwhile, actual lunatics showed up and prevented her from speaking. Watch. Sitting member, an elected member of the Congress, everyone can see where this is going. Marjorie Taylor Greene joins us tonight to recount what she saw in New York yesterday. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on. What was that like?
Well, it was absolute chaos, and that's what the mayor of New York City wanted to happen to me. You see, he threatened me and basically put out a dog whistle for violence against me. And then there was a funded text alert that went out naming me by name and telling people to do exactly what that man was doing, hand out whistles and try to create a chaotic scene of violence and assault. And that's against the law, by the way, Tucker. You see, they didn't want me to be able to protest and use my First Amendment rights, and they wanted violence. I think they wanted that to happen because they want to repeat January 6th all over again. They want all of us Trump supporters, MAGA, basically Republicans and just good Americans to look like criminals, and that's what they do in communist countries, and that's actually what we're seeing today.
Well, the first thing to do, of course, is take away your freedom to speak, and if you can't say what you really think, then you're not a free person, you're a slave. And once you are, then there's really nothing they can't do to you. Do you think people understand the implications of not allowing someone to speak?
I don't think they do. I don't think people realize what dangerous times we're living in. You see, the Democrat Party, they're the fascists. They want to cancel our voices. They want to censor us, and they want to completely force us into complying. You see, the reason why they're prosecuting, or should we say persecuting, Donald Trump is for the crime of actually winning the 2016 presidential election. That's what they're in hysterics over, and they've never gotten over it. But what they really want to do is once they remove their top political opponent, which is President Trump, they're going to come after all of us. This has happened repeatedly throughout history, and people need to wake up to the reality of the danger we're living in.
Really quick, since you were just there, but Mayor Adams described New York as, quote, his home. How did his home look? Pretty neat and tidy?
No, his home is disgusting. I compared it to what I called Gotham City. The streets are filthy. They're covered with people basically dying on drugs. They can't even stand up. They're falling over. There's so much crime in the city. I can't comprehend how people live there. It was repulsive. It smells bad. And I think it's a terrible place.
Yeah, with some nice people. I will say that. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, just back from New York. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tucker.
So the power of the media and politicians to ignore physical reality right in front of them never ceases to astound us. San Francisco, the prettiest country, naturally the prettiest country in this country, city, is now completely dangerous and drug infested. And if you don't believe that, you should know that a tech executive, a fairly famous one, was just murdered there yesterday. We'll speak to someone who's been trying to sound the alarm on San Francisco, and so far has been ignored. We'll be right back. Poor Chicago, really one of the great cities in the world, living under Lori Lightfoot and suffering. She got bounced out in the primary, and then last night, tragically, voters in that city elected a guy who's even worse. The new mayor will be called Brandon Johnson. He's an open racist, who believes in defunding the police, even though crime is up more than 60% this year. We're not overstating it. Here he is today.
If we are just simply looking at putting more money into policing, that has demonstrated to be a strategy that is certainly short-sighted. The comprehensive approach that we have put forth is something that the city of Chicago overwhelmingly embraced. And again, it's a testament to what can happen around the country.
That's just embarrassing. Can't even speak a grammatical sentence, and he's all in on defunding the police as, like, productive people of all races are fleeing the city as they're boarding up the loop. This is insane. That guy's now the mayor of Chicago. Very sad. Someone should think about how that happened, by the way, and also think about what happened in Wisconsin. That state has just fallen under Democratic Party control of the Supreme Court. The Soros-funded candidate won. And that means, among other things, that voter ID laws will be struck down before the next election in a swing state. Okay, Francie Hakes is a former state and federal prosecutor. She joins us tonight for an extremely depressing segment. Francie Hakes, thanks so much for coming on. These seem like significant election results.
Well, I think they're really significant, Tucker. When you're talking about the mayor of Chicago saying that it's short-sighted to put more police on the street or put more funding into training and recruiting great police officers who could actually solve crime. What is their murder clearance rate in Chicago right now? Something like 20%. That means something like 80% of murders in Chicago, which are way up, go unsolved. How is that helping the citizens of Chicago? I have no idea what he is thinking. I don't know what they're thinking. All I can say is that the voters of Chicago have apparently elected a man that they should have known was a police defunder and therefore is going to do nothing to make that city safe. And I think that the crime is only going to go up.
Yeah, and the guy spent the last couple of days of the campaign attacking whites, like this open racist stuff, and no one ever says anything about that. How is that allowed in America? How can you openly, baldly attack an entire racial group in a political campaign and no one even notices?
Well, of course, we're supposed to have free speech in this country, Tucker, but as you just heard from Marjorie Taylor Greene, it really only seems to go one way. He's allowed to say whatever he wants, but it used to be that if you said something that crazy and that racist, you certainly couldn't get elected dog catcher, much less mayor of Chicago. But here's where we are. He's mayor of Chicago.
Yeah, politicians should never attack any group on the basis of their race. That's just totally immoral. I thought that was the lesson of the civil rights movement, but apparently it works. That's the worst part. That's the scariest part. Francie Hakes, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So you just can't overstate how great San Francisco is fundamentally.